Good morning, everyone. Let's get started with another video training series. And the purpose of this video is to go over the operation of the VMD, right? The VMD is this screen here, which is located in the center of the aircraft's panel. Now I'm going to turn on the battery. When you turn on the battery, the VMD doesn't have an on-off switch, right? It goes into a testing process, and after a self-test, it displays all the parameters needed for the pilot to monitor the aircraft and engine. The VMD, folks, is an indicator used by the pilot to monitor the aircraft and engine parameters. It replaces the T4 indicator, NG, torque meter, fuel quantity indicator, oil pressure indicator, and temperature indicator. External air temperature, which used to be a bunch of indicators here on the panel on aircraft up to the AS350B2. So it consists of two screens, an upper screen and a lower screen. Internally, it has three modules, two information processing modules and one display module to generate these images here for the pilot. It is also responsible for providing the pilot with information about the limitations from the flight manual, right? So, for example, here on the ING indicator, this yellow range here is the range where the pilot can stay for 5 minutes, right? And here is the end of the yellow range. That's what they call it, right? Usually that's the limit for maximum continuous power. And this VMD, at the top we have the fuel indication here, the flight range, pink, which is the amount of fuel inside the tank. But the pilot also has digital information down here at the bottom. Here we have the bleed indication, right? This green and white means that the engine bleed is open. And here, when the aircraft has a sand filter or when the heating is on, the so-called P2 appears here, which is the air bleed from station 2. We have the torque indication, which is being produced by the engine. The T4 indication produced by the engine. We have the torque indication and the NG indication. These indications at the bottom are also displayed as digital numbers. Here on the left side, we have the amount of fuel and the outside air temperature. This field here, which is blank, is used for failure message display. All the failures I see in the system, the pilot will have the information here. On the lower screen, the pilot has information about oil temperature, oil pressure, and the pressure of the fuel system from the fuel tank pumps. This aircraft, the AS350B2, shows the pressure indication of both tank pumps. I'm going to turn it on here so you can see the fuel pressure rising. There you go, all right? I'm going to turn it off. And at the bottom, we have here the indication of the PP12 power supply and the current indication of the PP12 bus bar. On aircraft that have full flow transmission, here I have how much the aircraft is consuming per kilogram, and here the amount of time it can keep flying. And in the middle here, we also have a failure indication field, just like at the top. To access the maintenance modules, we have to use these keys here. These keys, they start with the off 1 and off 2 keys, which turn off processor 1 or processor 2 or both. It is forbidden for the pilot to turn off the VMD in flight. Here we have a little switch called the scroll switch, and this scroll switch is used for that. To select a desired page, let's say I want to access a maintenance page. I use the scroll, the reset button. Here it is used to return to the normal page. If I went to a page and want to go back, I use the reset button. The select switch is for selecting a field. If I'm on a page and want to select a field, I'll use the select switch, and plus and minus I'll use to modify the values of these fields, right? Enter is used when I want to validate a value that I have entered. And this bright plus and minus is for decreasing and increasing the brightness of the VMD screen. All right. These are the alphanumeric keyboards. These alphanumeric keyboards are rarely used by the pilot during flight. The most the pilot will use here is the scroll, right? So they can get the information from the performance page. Later, we'll talk a little about this performance folder. And this scroll can also be accessed here through the collective, right? So there's a collective switch that the pilot can use here to access the performance page. If there's a failure in either of these two screens here, folks, the remaining screen will take on the functions of both screens. The pilot will use the scroll button here to access the screen that's behind and the one that's in front, okay? Now, let's talk about how to access the maintenance pages. I have to turn off both processes, hold scroll and reset, then turn both processes back on. With both processors on, when this message appears, test in progress, release key, you select it. At this point, I will only have access to the maintenance menu from the top section. The maintenance menu is made up of 5 items. There's the fly report, which I use when I want to see the latest fly reports from recent flights. I can check the faults that were recorded by the VMD. If there was any overlimit, right? Let's select here to see if there was any overlimit, accessing it here. This here shows how long it lasted. Is the VMD working? The operating time on this aircraft can be accumulated if it came from another aircraft. That's more. I think the manufacturer has an idea about that. And the data load is used when we need to load something, which is something the operator usually doesn't do. So I'll select fly reporter as we normally do. And then I have the last flight there, right? How many cycles there were, the duration of the flight. It keeps accumulating the number of flights and gives me the cycles here for NG and NF and the total. This needs to be recorded in the engine logbook because the cycles, these NG and NF disks, are tracked by cycles. So the VMD does this calculation. The company's CTM staff keeps track, accumulating it in the control spreadsheets and recording it in the engine logbook. And here I have, look, page 31, and it's telling me I use plus and minus. So 3029. So I can access the last 30 and the last 31 flights to see what happened. For me to exit this page, all I have to do is press reset. Then, if I want to check the faults, I select the fault. I press enter, and here's where a lot of people get confused and don't understand this screen, right? So, let me explain. Up here in the upper corner, it shows the total number of accumulated flights for the aircraft. So this aircraft has completed, since this VMD was installed, 2,256 flights. And then out of these 2,256 flights, I have this cross here. So what does this vertical number above and below mean? This will always be 1, and the number on top will tell you how many flights had faults. So there were a total of 25 flights with faults. That's the number inside. I can select here the number inside, these 24 faults. So fault number 24 happened on flight 2215, and there were 2 faults. To find out what fault this is, I press enter and then look at the screen in left-right mode, right? Or it said it detected one from the keyboard. Reference test 39, right? With this reference test, you go to the maintenance manual. Since the system didn't detect anything, it didn't show any faults. It must have been a momentary fault. And here I can see that there were 2 faults. See what the second one was, right? The same fault. For me to exit here, I press reset. If I want to select another flight, then I come here and select from the 25 flights where there was a fault. So out of the 25 flights on flight 19, there was a fault. And what was the flight number? 2074 out of 2,256 flights. Then I press enter and I can select it. So there was a momentary communication fault between processor 1 and processor 2, which is called crosstalk. The reference code for the fault is 43. To check in the maintenance manual. To exit from here, I press reset. To exit from here, I press reset. And I come back here to the main menu where I will do what? And now I'm not going to check the fault. I'm going to see if there was any overlimit. So here I have 31 pages that tell me. So if you notice, all the overlimits are here, but there was nothing. Everything is at 0. It checks the overlimits for NR, DNF, DNG, T4, and touch. For me to select these 31 pages, I keep pressing here, right? Okay, am I not? There was no fault, so that means if the pilot says, look, I think I did an overtalkie, we have to check here what the overtalk value was, how long it lasted. Then we see the maximum, and we go to the maintenance manual. There is a checklist there that must be completed before the next flight, right? It's very simple to see the overlimit. Then I do the reset and exit the overlimit, right? And I keep pressing select to see the operating time it has. So this VMD has 2,344 hours of operation. Now I'm using it. It's counting the time, not flight time, but operating time. That's more like it. I think the manufacturer keeps track of the reliability of their equipment. Okay, so for me to get out of here, reset, right? And this last one, data load, we don't use it, right? The operator usually doesn't use it. We can download the data here on the left side of the console, but it's not used for exiting here. So guys, reset, right? Damn, it didn't exit. How do I get out of here? Then someone goes over there. The only way to exit this maintenance menu is to turn off both processors and turn them back on again, right? At that moment, it runs a test again and returns to the pilot configuration. To access the configuration menu, I do the same thing. I turn off both processors, but now it's not scroll and reset, right? It's select and enter. At that moment, I turn on both processors, and then when it gives me the release keys message, I enter the module. Unfortunately, it failed. So let's turn it off again, right? I'm going to turn it on again. Select and enter, then I turn on both processors, right? And the moment I turn it on, I wait for it to do analysis 15, then I enter maintenance mode. Here is where I do the manual calibration of the chemical toro. We'll see in the classroom how to do the automatic chemical toro calibration. And by selecting this, you configure the aircraft, right? Here you specify how many amps the start generator is. The AS350B2, this one at most is 160 amps. You can't install the 200 amp one, the fill flow. It's not activated. The GPS is not activated. The unit being used is SI and the altitude is in feet. So that's what we have configured on the aircraft. I can change the unit here to kilograms, to pounds, to have the quantity in kilos or pounds and so on. So what do I do to get out of here? I press select. I'm not going to validate or change anything. Select abort. I press enter, not storage. Right, exactly as it is. If I press reset, it doesn't exit. And the way I get out of here is by turning off both switches. I turn both switches back on and the VMD returns to flight mode. There you go. Is this VMD doing a self-test in flight, folks? In other words, the moment the pilot starts the engine and the NG exceeds 60%, these indicators become a single indicator called FLI. But the pilot has, here on the right side of the screen, all the information for the parameters separately. When the pilot enters the red range, the red bar always appears. Or if he enters the yellow range, the yellow bar appears. If the pilot enters the red range, in addition to the red bar flashing, he will hear an audio signal, a gong, drawing attention to the fact that he has entered the instrument's red range. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you very much for your attention.